As leaders, do you think we're ready to be accountable? Now, it's rhetorical. I'm not expecting you to answer, but I have noticed a lot of organizations tend to confuse leadership with accountability. They are not, I repeat, not the same thing. Heck, I just had a conversation a week ago with someone in a pretty strong leadership position and still was kind of confused about them being two different things. Titles denote accountability. Who's responsible for what tasks getting done, right? Leadership, on the other hand, is about being in charge of the people getting those tasks done. Their well-being, their growth, their development, helping them become leaders. I've heard in some organizations that accountability is a problem because if people are responsible, if they own their individual actions, their program, their initiatives, their services, sure, they own any success, but they are also at risk of being the face of any perceived or actual failure. So when you ask, who's responsible for this, hands suddenly go up in the air going, not me, not me, not me. It's a hard place to be in for so many people, but that definitely doesn't sound like leadership. Well, good leadership anyway. So understanding what leadership is and what accountability is really, really important because as emerging leaders, we demonstrate leadership through accountability. And our guest today is asking us to take it even a step further. How about adding compassion to that accountability? Because he believes we'll build better, stronger, more human-centric leaders by doing so. I'm excited to share with you. Hold on. I'm Russel Lolliker, host of Relationships at Work, the guide for emerging leaders to create a workplace we love. I'm a communications and leadership nerd with a couple of decades of experience in both of those areas, but what I also have is a heap of curiosity on how we all of us, can improve the employee experience. And this show right here that you're listening to is a great resource to help with just that. Today, we're getting into compassionate accountability. Now, what is that? Well, I'm going to let our guest today get into that. But what I will say is that it's not just about being accountable to your work, but also being accountable to yourselves, to ourselves, our actions, our inactions, those we're in charge of, our programs, our services, our products. Why? Why is accountability so important? Well, think about your own work experience. Have you ever worked with someone who took accountability? What were the benefits of a leader that steps up and took that accountability? I own this. I'm responsible. Look no further. Because I have worked with those that have done that, and I'll tell you, a few things come up for me. First, it increased trust and respect for that particular team that leader led. When leaders take accountability for their actions, decisions, mistakes, it fosters trust and respect among employees. Number two, enhanced employee engagement and loyalty. People want to work with and for people that take accountability. They certainly don't want to work with people that keep shirking responsibilities. And last but certainly not least, there's many of them. Go ahead, I'll let you Google. Stronger team cohesion. As an accountable leader, we're setting a tone, a positive one. It even inspires others to take ownership of their actions and work. And when people feel responsible, they work hard to achieve goals. And that sounds like an amazing organization to work for and leaders to work with. My guest today, Marc Lesser, has some experience in helping leaders find that accountability. He helped develop the Search Inside Yourself program within Google, which is an emotional intelligence training for leaders. And that might give you a sense, a taste, as it were, about where Marc's head is, about how in this episode, he believes that being a stronger leader and being more accountable go hand in hand. And it's as much about mindset as anything else. So if you're looking to shift your mindset, or you know someone that should have their mindset shifted a little bit, Marc is pretty good at helping us think a little differently. So over to Marc. And on the show today, we have Marc Lesser, and here is why he is awesome. He's an executive coach and Zen teacher. I had to slow down when I said Zen teacher. You notice that there's just a bit more of a relax in my voice as soon as you say Zen teacher. And founder and CEO of Z, I'm Canadian, so I have to say Z, BA Associates, an executive development and leadership consulting company. He's helped develop the Search Inside Yourself program within Google, which was a mindfulness-based emotional intelligence training for leaders. He's a busy guy, writes a lot. He's done 5 books, one of which I'm going to highlight right now because it's new, it's shiny. You can get it probably by the time this is released. He's the host of Zen Bones podcast, and that book I was kind of teasing you about is called Finding Clarity: How Compassionate Accountability Builds Vibrant Relationships. Name of the podcast. Get it? Relationships at work? Yeah, okay. Builds vibrant relationships, thriving workplaces, and meaningful lives. It's a key topic for our discussion today. I'm excited to talk to you, Marc. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Russell. I'm excited to talk to you too.
Thank you, sir. So I have to start with the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience?
I've had some terrific ones and I've had some pretty bad ones. Maybe I need to start upbeat here.
Sure.
Yeah, what comes to mind is when I was running the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, which was an organization that actually got birthed at Google headquarters. So that was kind of amazing. And partly that was, a relationship that I had with a Google engineer when I got brought in to figure out how to develop mindfulness and emotional intelligence programs in Google. And just the whole process of that early relationship and then building a team and creating exactly the culture that I wanted to create.
Wow.
And that meant hiring people that were smarter than me, which that didn't take that much, but it's harder to do than it sounds. And we were just rocking and rolling as a team. Now, it didn't hurt at all, that we had the Google branding and Google win behind us. So that was a beautiful combination to the wins of that brand with the great people that I had hired, and just like everything we did turned to gold. It seemed like, oh, let's try doing a public program and see what happens. And 60 people from all around the world sign up for a public program and love it and want to know, where else can we do these? And we ended up doing public programs in Toronto and Montreal and then all over the world. So that's a success story about relationships and people and team building.
I actually want to dig into that just for a sec, because the funny thing is it doesn't sometimes a lot of the time, it doesn't matter the name and the brand or the resources or the wind beneath your wings to actually be successful sometimes. Like, you can have all of that working for you and still not deliver what you were actually hoping to do, and minds changed. What did you feel was key for you to be successful in that role?
It's funny though. I also thought that, you can have none of those things and find something that is very successful.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah. It's interesting, and I think a core rule of thumb in the business world is that when what you do is successful, you're a genius. And when it's not successful, you're an idiot. And it could be the same exact thing. There are many variables to this. I would say that part of it was that I think we were tapping into a real need around helping leaders be more human. We were dealing with, I think, the problem of stress, anxiety, and a kind of a lack of passion and meaning in people's work that again, I do think that the Google wins helped with the credibility piece. But so in some way it got us in the door. But once we were in the door, I think that we were, one of the language that Google engineers would use is they could take their game faces off in our workshops. And I think there's a real passion to be able to take your game face off, meaning to not have to be defensive or to play a role or, So it's interesting. Of course, we are all playing a role. We are different people in the business world, in the work world, but we don't have to be assholes. So you told me not to curse, and here I am.
That is a lie. I did tell you could curse. I'm just amazed that you took advantage of it. And
Yeah.
I'm glad you bring that up, because there is that masking that a lot of us do in organizations,
Yeah.
especially when we move from one environment to another. And I think that really plays in well to what we're going to talk about today, because we're talking about compassionate accountability. And that, as you talk about in your book, is something that's important not only in your relationships at work, but also in relationships at home. And I want to dig into that. But first, I usually have to start every podcast the same way, and I didn't think I was going to when I first started the podcast, which is defining terms, because we talk about stuff all the time and we never actually say what they mean. Leadership being a big one that just drives me nuts. So can we start with first, what do you mean when you took on this journey of this book around compassionate accountability?
Yeah, so let's start with accountability, because that's the in some way that's the driver here. And accountability is, I think, both individual, so aligning with your own values, doing what you say you're going to do, holding yourself to to a kind of inner alignment, and how that plays out in the workplace. But then a lot of accountability has to do with relationship. And a word I like a lot is the word alignment. And I would say accountability is about being aligned with what success looks like, both in terms of what it is we're trying to achieve, but also how we're trying to achieve it. And it's both of those things. And the compassionate piece is that it's easy for accountability to be harsh or cold, or there's nothing human really about accountability, and it needs that relationship piece, that trust piece, that careness, kindness piece. And there's something, there's a just a very basic tension between those two words, compassion and accountability. But the reason I latched onto them is I think they're essential. I think that, compassion without accountability, that doesn't work. Just a really great workplace, but where not much is getting done, because we need to get stuff done. And accountability is getting stuff done, but it leaves out the human element, the caring, the trusting element. And that's turning out, that's turning out to be more and more essential. And it's a relatively new, I think, just how important humans are, the emotional piece, the mindfulness piece, almost every business depends on people working together, collaborating.
And that's something I've actually struggled with for years. It's actually one of the big reasons why I started this podcast, was that leadership, and we talked about definitions, but leadership, as I always saw it defined in the corporate world, was getting a thing done,
Right.
fixing somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
Like that's leadership. Damned be who actually gets hurt in the wreckage of accomplishing that thing, but that wasn't the measure of success. That's not what gets rewarded. That's not what gets promoted.
Yeah.
So what's the reception to suddenly coming in and going, no, we've got human beings that actually are getting burnt out here? How is the accountability, compassion been received with all these changes we've been going through?
Yeah, I think once you experience that the workplace doesn't have to be horrible, right? And in fact, again, this is aspirational, but something that's worth aspiring to is for the workplace to be a place where you can actually grow and cultivate character, cultivate well-being, while at the same time, and not only at the expense of getting stuff done, but increasing what gets done. This is the magic, and this is what I was describing, the opening question that and not everyone is lucky enough, I think, to get to experience it. But once you experience it, I think of my first company that I started was a calendar and greeting card company. And there was something about our yearly meetings of like, what new titles are we going to create for calendars for the next year? And there was just we had so much fun playing, collaborating, imagining, brainstorming, and achieving great results in that process. And it was just such a beautiful experience. But that wasn't my experience in a lot of workplaces prior to that I found myself in, where things were tense and anxious, and where there a lot of backbiting and political stuff, and that's, I think, more the default in, especially, well, I was going to say especially in larger organizations, but anywhere where there's people trying to deal with money and power and hierarchy. It takes a real, I think, strong aspirational skill and mindset to break through those more default kinds of habits that are easy to fall into in the workplace.
Well, you named the book Finding Clarity. So I'm really curious how that digs into this benefit.
Yeah, it's interesting when the book was in process and the book was all about accountability and compassionate accountability, and someone said, "What is it really about?" And I said, "It's about clarity." And that accountability is in some way about becoming more clear about, again, what is it? What does success look like? What are we trying to achieve here? What are we measuring? What is, who are our customers, and what are our financial goals? But also, like, what kind of culture do we want to create? And all of that, I think, requires a kind of clarity, in the sense of breaking through our habitual energy, breaking through so many of us grew up with all kinds of ideas about, work isn't supposed to be fun. There's a reason they call it work, and many other, I think, limiting and mistaken beliefs. So clarity, in a way, is the kind of having a clear vision about what it is we're doing, and being able to see and identify, mistakes and breakthroughs and limiting energy and mistaken beliefs and all of that stuff.
How do you introduce this into a culture? Because first you have to know if you even need to introduce it, and then you have to do so.
Well, usually, most cultures are, you bring in any awareness, and there's often like a tremendous amount of conflict in any organization. And an interesting starting point is, how are you guys doing with conflict? How skilled are you in identifying, working with, and skillfully working through conflict? How are you doing with measuring, accountability and performance? These usually are places where there's a fair amount of stress, anxiety, and room for improvement. Yeah, I mean, that's often, in a way, that's the starting point for this book, is around avoiding conflict is trouble. And as I openly say, the only times that I've gotten into trouble in my work world have been through avoiding having those difficult conversations, letting things get wonky, and things can get wonky quick when you have groups of people working together, and leaders and people working there are not leaning into and skillfully working with places where we're not aligned, or where we are being triggered by someone else's behavior, where we're constantly feeling like we can't talk to that person, we can't tell the truth here, it's too dangerous. Like, all those things are just culture killers, and just really bad for business.
So there's a lot of people that are, well, they avoid conflict. They are either the introverts or people that just don't feel, they get anxious or don't want to be in those situations where there is that conflict. Can you sort of walk me through what conflict looks like with a compassionate accountability lens?
I mean, it's interesting to see. Well, the first rule of that is to be curious, not furious, right? And this is the name of the first chapter in my book, because often when there's conflict, we humans we often go right to either blame or defending ourselves. And I think it's helpful to understand that this is something that's part of our evolution, that we want to be safe. We need to stay alive. We easily feel attacked in some way, even when we're not being attacked. Someone looks at us or says something, and there's a fight or flight tendency. So it starts with to be more curious about your own feelings, about your own patterns, and how are you with conflict? Are you someone who likes to attack? Are you someone who likes to retreat? What would it look like if you were more skillful in working with conflict? And it starts, I think, with curiosity. And then from there, I think if you can not be so caught by fight or flight, you can start to notice, what stories are you telling about yourself or about the other person, about the other people's intentions. So again, it's like a great way to there's many, many tools and tricks about working with conflict, but a really good one. In fact, I used it today in some misalignment that I was having with someone who I work with is, the story that I'm telling myself is that this isn't something that you feel all that excited about because you're not showing a lot of initiative, you're not coming up with a lot of new ideas. So, but just starting with the story that I'm telling myself is a way I'm not attacking and I'm not defending. I'm making myself vulnerable by saying this is something that I'm doing and I want to check out what story are you telling? And like in this case, it's like, that's interesting. I'm telling myself quite a different story. And just to be able to get those stories out there can be a really potent and profound relationship builder. But it takes some courage, it takes some self-awareness, again, and sometimes we're just so, if we want to strangle someone, it's hard to, start with the story and and you have to be able to say it in a way that's real and not sometimes that can be perceived as attacking or defensive. We also are, I think, to recognize that we are emotional creatures and to be part of, I think, relationship building and a big part of leadership is self-awareness and emotion and aware of our emotions. And sometimes we don't even know it, right? People often don't even see that they are, attacking or avoiding. And other people say, gee, you seem really angry. Oh, no, I'm not angry. Well, your body language is telling me that you seem really angry or you seem really defensive. So I think these are such important skill building, well-being building, character building that can spill over nicely in all our relationships. The way we are in work is the way we are in our marriages or with our families or as parents. And I think we can practice this stuff at home and it'll help us in our workplaces, and we can practice this stuff in our workplaces and it'll spill over and help us in our homes.
I want to dial back just a minute there because you're getting into the mindfulness of it. You're getting into that because I often say, and I love that you said this, that self-awareness is one of the biggest superpowers you can have because everything springs from understanding yourself better. Maybe I'm getting into your Zen teaching here. I don't know. But what are some things that people can be doing? Because I know people that are listening to things like this and going, yeah, that's easy to say to understand yourself better, but they're too busy being in 17 meetings today to take that breath to go, am I mad? Am I angry? I'm just here surviving.
Yeah. I mean, I have a strong bias here that, not only mindfulness, but I think this is one of the real important things about having some kind of a meditation practice, because I think we all need, I love sports analogies, right? So we get to see Steph Curry, shooting that 3-point shot and just amazing, right? His skill, his passion, his enjoyment. He's clearly not, there's no thought when he's shooting that shot that he's going to miss it. It's all like, I'm just I'm just completely in the moment shooting this basketball. But behind the scenes, countless hours of practice, countless hours of practice to be able to be in the moment skillfully. So I think the same thing is true of leaders and people in the workplace. If you want to be skillful in having these difficult conversations, if you want to show up as a spacious, engaged, sage-like leader, there's got to be some practice there. And part of that practice, I think, is to have some time when you're outside of the game, when you're just, in some way, one way that I describe meditation, it's the practice of training yourself to let go of expecting things, training yourself to not be caught by whatever story you're telling yourself, right? It's those stories that lead to us blaming or defending, and this is a terrible thing for leaders to do, is to blame or defend, right? Who wants to work with a leader who's blaming and defending? Not good behavior for a skillful leader. It takes like practice and a body. It's like it's in the body. So meditation, and to me, meditation and mindfulness are somatic practices, body practices, where we're actually getting in touch with our breath. We're getting in touch with our bodies. We're getting some insight. So if we are feeling angry, and sometimes anger is quite appropriate, but sometimes it's not. So this is where that, like, being in touch with, oh, anger is arising in my body, as opposed to yelling at someone or suppressing it and turning away. So those emotions live in our bodies, and those emotions easily become stories that turn into action. So this is to me, this is the nitty gritty of when we talk about self-awareness. Mm-hmm. It starts with the body. It starts with our emotional lives, and noticing our kind of habit energy and not being so caught by those habits, being able to turn that habit energy into having more freedom about how we're going to respond, to respond more freely, more appropriately. If it's time to be angry, be angry. If it's time, to celebrate, be able to celebrate.
Could you give me the link then for that mindfulness, those practices, to the importance that has on that compassionate accountability?
Yeah. Again, these things are completely intertwined, I believe, right? So, because in some way, they require a high level of self-awareness and a high level of having the freedom to not be tossed around by our habits and life energy, not be tossed around by our fears and the blame game, the blocking game. So to be able to skillfully align with ourselves and with others, I think requires that practice, those self-awareness practice, those emotional intelligence practices, and certainly the compassion piece, right? To truly care about people outside of their roles. This is a big one, I think. It's easy to fall into in the workplace, because our roles are important. What we do is important. What we accomplish is important. But man, we're all human beings. And to remember that and be able to this is, I think, a profound way to build more caring, trusting, effective relationships, is to realize the dual nature of our roles. There is the particular work roles, but there's also the human roles that we need to recognize and take care of.
So we've touched on it a bit, but I'm really curious what your thoughts on this, because the book digs into it, is the fact that we are being compassionate and accountable in the workplace and at home are linked. Now, the reason I think that's so interesting is because I can't tell you how often leaders treat home life as a completely separate entity than their work life. They treat things they do in their regular life around building trust as things they just don't even think occurs to them when they're in the workplace. Like all these things. I find it so weird. So how does this sort of bridge that gap?
I think it's good to recognize we are different, right? There are different sets of rules and expectations. The cultures in our work life are different, but there's also a tremendous, I think, amount of overlap in our essential humanity, right? In our, bringing in, it's interesting. I think of, I recently did a workshop for wildland firefighters. Okay. These are like athletes who have to be really, really skilled at making quick decisions in life and death situations. And there's this one leader who shared with me that he turns into, he doesn't like himself when in emergency situations because he becomes an absolute jerk, an absolute bully. And we talked about, experimenting with seeing, could he be just as decisive, clear, and at the same time be much more caring and trusting, and to see how that works out. I've had a lot of these conversations with executives who also, people who tend to be bullies. It used to work, you used to get promoted in the workplace. No, maybe some places, but I've worked with many coaching clients who they're just not going to be able to be the kinds of leaders that they want to be if they can't distinguish questioning people from interrogating people. Interrogating people who work for you does not go over very well. People they'll be afraid of you, and it's not a sustainable or healthy relationship. I think now there's been much, much more assumption and agreement that we need to have healthy relationships, and that healthy and effective actually go together. Just like at home, right? You can't just boss your kids around or boss your partner, whoever you like. There needs to be a sense of alignment. There needs to be a sense of a different kind of accountability, and compassionate accountability, I think, is actually a great guideline for raising our children or being a father, right? Or being a mother, or that bringing in that sense of high ethics, high honesty, dependability, with trust and love, even bringing in the L word. And I like to bring in the L word even into the leadership world and the business world, that I think there's something beautiful about, really respecting and loving the people that we work with. It's the kind of workplace I want to work within.
I'm right there with you. And I agree with everything you're saying about building relationships. Again, name of the podcast. I prioritize it so much. But I also know organizations that, as you say, aren't ready for this kind of conversation. Or even just from an individual standpoint, they're like going, yes, I'm going to be compassionate. I'm going to be accountable. I'm going to lead this way. And they walk into a culture that looks at them going, what are you talking about? Yeah. So how do you champion this? Do you stick to your bubble, or do you scream to the high heavens that this is the way things should be?
Russell, this reminds me of, I was working with a big, multinational corporation in which I started talking to a variety of leaders about bringing in mindfulness and emotional intelligence. And each leader said exactly the same thing. Well, I'm ready for this. I want this, but the organization's not ready. Every different person I went to. So it's so interesting. So often our perception of our organizations, I mean, there are exceptions, of course, and there are toxic leaders who are just never going to change. But I've found almost everyone wants a healthy, vibrant, trusting workplace. And I think it takes my suggestion is you go first, but you have to go first with skill, and and you have to embody it, right? You have to make yourself someone who is perceived as trustworthy, someone who is not only talking about this stuff, but that you can feel it. You can feel it from people who are well processed, who bring this, who really walk the talk and talk as well as talk the talk. But try little experiments. Try, whatever it is you're wanting from, and this is, I think, a good rule of thumb from all relationships at home or at work. Whatever you're wanting from someone, whether it's more recognition, appreciation, you go first. You express recognition. You recognize other people. You appreciate them. You want more time. You give them more time and see what happens.
Model that behavior.
Exactly.
So you're talking about communication. How can you be more compassionate, accountable when it comes to communication, where you're trying to, bridge that gap as well?
You just have to practice it. You have to be willing, again, you have to be willing to notice your own fight or flight response and be someone who is more open, present, curious, someone who's not being caught by your own stories and being curious about the stories around you. Yeah, be someone who's willing to listen, to notice what people are struggling with and seeing, how can I help? How can I help this person's anxiety? What are they struggling with? Sometimes people bring in, the anxiety of their difficult relationships, their divorces, or children who are dealing with drugs, and sometimes just taking a few minutes and being willing to listen and feel someone else, a little bit of empathy. Empathy is a big part of compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Empathy is actually being willing to feel someone else's feelings, and compassion is that plus the desire to actually help and heal.
What I'm getting all personal with you now, Marc. What inspired you to write this book? Like, what problem did you feel that needed to be fixed to put this book out into the world?
Yeah, I think partly was personal, was to see how much I have been growing and learning through my own struggles with conflict, and that it didn't come a tremendous amount of work in me getting more and more skilled as a leader. And I found it to be one of the most important skills with my team and with my organization, was being able to go toward lack of alignment and conflict. And then all of the pieces around that, which meant I had to become more and more aware of my own habits, my own fight and flight energy. Yeah. And I got to do it with my team. I got to do it with my partner, with my children, seeing that it was a bad habit of avoiding conflict with my children. And I've gotten better and better over time. Still imperfect, but some definite improvement there.
Well, as you've introduced this in workshops and mindfulness, and we've touched on a few of this, what have you noticed in leaders that this was sort of this aha moment? What did they need for them to go, oh yeah, this is the way I should be addressing?
I found it such a great conversation. Like, how are you doing with conflict? How do you do with conflict? How would you rate yourself? And most leaders are conflict avoidant and can use improvement in that area. Some are overly high accountability and low compassion. You see a fair amount of that, especially at the higher echelons. And there they need different skills and strategies for dealing with conflict. They need to bring more connection, more of the compassion piece in. Yeah, I once got hired by a CEO of a large complex company who everyone was afraid of him. And it was not the kind of environment that he wanted. It was an environment of fear, and everyone thought every time he called, oh, am I going to get fired? Like, who wants to work in that kind of, and he didn't want that, and he needed to better understand, the way that he habitually created fear and stress and didn't want to do it, and needed to practice making himself more aware, more vulnerable with the people he worked with.
And I think, practicing compassion and accountability over and over and over again, I think will help with that.
Yeah. I also, one of my favorite rules of thumb in this realm is, if you're not cultivating trust, you are cultivating cynicism. That cynicism, I've noticed, is the default in most companies because there's power, there's money. You have to really work at building a culture that is high in trust, high in compassion and accountability. Yeah, it's very easy to break it. It's very easy to break that. And we're also, I think we're also tenderhearted. Even the people that are the crustiest looking, underneath those crusts often are tenderhearted people that are easily fall prey to fears and cynicism.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end this, Mark. Why don't we finish it with the one question I also end every podcast with, which is, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
I call it the four most important words in relationship are, how are we doing? And actually, to be able to ask that question and mean it, and then just be curious and willing to hear what someone might have to say. How are we doing? It's a great question in many of our work relationships, and not bad at home either, with your partner, children, parents. Yeah. But with true curiosity, how are we doing?
That is Marc Lesser. He's an executive coach, Zen teacher, and CEO, and he's got a brand spanking new book called Finding Clarity: How Compassionate Accountability Builds Vibrant Relationships, Thriving Workplaces, and Meaningful Lives. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Thank you, Russell.
And that'll do it for another episode of Relationships at Work, the Emerging Leader's Guide to Creating a Workplace We Love. I'm Russel Lolliker, and if you enjoyed this episode, I have something for you. That's right, if you want to see some faces attached to the words that are coming out of their heads, check out our YouTube channel. Newly launched, has 4 episodes under their belt at the time of this episode being released anyway, and I'll be sharing new episodes every single Friday to help you create that workplace, that one that people are excited to go to every day and want to stay at, to help, to foster better engagement, better relationships, all the good stuff that we want in our careers and our employee experience. That's what the show's for. Anyway, I highly recommend going over to YouTube, do the search of Relationships at Work, and you'll see my smiling faces and some amazing local and global leaders that will help you guide your organization. All right, you have a great day. We'll talk to you later.